Hello to my fire signs Aries, Leo and Sagittarius. Welcome to the Gemini new moon. You'll find the timestamps for your rising signs listed below. Hello Aries rising, welcome to your horoscope for the new moon in Gemini, happening on June the 18th at 2:39 p.m. if you're in the southern hemisphere with me. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, it's the night before on the 17th of June. Welcome to your reading, and also welcome to an invitation to cool it a little bit. And this isn't to put a stopper on anything that you've got happening or anything like that, but if you have been feeling maybe a bit conflicted over the past, couple of weeks or months, then what I'm kind of hoping to offer you, Aries, is a little bit of respite from maybe some of the frenetic chatter that's been going on in the mind. If there's been 2 potential pathways or 3 or 6, and you've been having a difficult time choosing which one to commit to or which one to go down, or have been trying to put into words what you've been conjuring, for want of a better term, but haven't really known how to start or who to offer it to, then I want this reading to be a bit of a relaxant, a bit of a muscle relaxant if you possibly can. So the sun and the moon are at 26 degrees of Gemini, and they're kind of making note of like the end of Gemini season. So we've kind of been in this ultra conversational, chatty kind of vibe for the last 3 weeks or so, and the new moon's occurring just as we sort of give way into Cancer season. So from the 22nd of June we'll be in Cancer season. It's nice, and Gemini for you rules your 3rd house, and in Hellenistic astrology, in one of the ancient forms of reading the sky, the 3rd house was called the house of the goddess. And I really like that definition, and it's sort of there's a lot of scope if we think about the goddess when we think of the 3rd house. The traditional way or the modern way of reading the 3rd house is it can represent our local environment, our neighborhood, short trips, perhaps our brothers and sisters is possibly another definition of the 3rd house. And all of that's true. If we interlay the definition of the goddess, if we interlay the definition of ritual worship of the goddess to the 3rd house, things like folk magic or things like divination or things like lessons about spirituality or private rituals, they all kind of come out of the 3rd house too. I really like that for folks that are kind of, magically inclined. At this lunation in particular, it might be nice to be a bit more heavy-handed with the magical language as well, Aries, because the sun and the moon at 26 degrees are forming a square, if you're sorry. I've been hanging out with a lot of Canadian people lately, and I've been having to do a different accent because Australians have a hard R in their voice, and it's very difficult to understand if you're not from here. So forgive me. What I was saying is that Neptune, the planet of dreams and illusion and fantasy, is still in Pisces, and at 27 degrees will be forming a square with this lunation. So there's stuff that Neptune is really good at as far as make-believe, and as far as, as I said, like fantasy, as far as illusion, as far as possibility is another thing that Neptune really conjures up. When I think of Neptune, I always think of, like the deep sea. Neptune was the god of the sea, So there's a lot of power attached to that kind of image. There's also a lot of illusion and depth and mystery attached to that mythology too. So Neptune's been really living large in Pisces for the past decade, at least. Since 2011 was their first pass into Pisces. Then they stationed retrograde back into Aquarius. But then from February 2012, they nestled into Pisces and have been in there ever since. They won't leave until 2026. So the outer planets move slow. They go back and forth with their retrograde from our perspective. When they come into aspect with either planets in our chart, our birth chart, or in the transiting planets, that's when they sort of, they're to be remarked upon. So there's almost like a feeling of like potential delusion that might be coming from some of your darker recesses, or there might be like a clue, a sort of gateway into a new way of being for you as well. So let's have a look at the tarot. The last date, so you know how each of the signs are broken up into 3 wedges of the pie? And there's a tarot card for each of those wedges. So for the last wedge, the last decan of Gemini, we look to the 10 of Swords in the tarot. And if the swords in tarot represent our mind, our thoughts, we can instantly relate that to Gemini, which is an air sign, which again is about the mind, about thinking, about intellect. And so the sun and the moon are highlighting this card for us to talk about at this time. And the encouragement in this card, as difficult as it looks, as hard as it is to kind of bear witness to, the 10 of Swords can be really violent. And it can sort of bring up feelings of like continual hatred or continual, like almost like a fight, an intellectual sparring match, or insults, or cruelty. And this could also be something that maybe might be happening a bit internally too. When I think of Gemini, I have a Gemini moon, so when I think of Gemini, it's a very internal process for me. I do think about my internal workings, and I do sometimes can give myself a bit of a reprieve from my self-criticism when I think of Gemini, because if we, all of this violence can be external, like, human beings can be really awful to one another. They can also be effing gorgeous to one another. They can be really cruel, and so we can experience this sort of these barbs of truth from the outside. We can experience them from society. We can experience them especially if we have any kind of, individuality about us. We come from a different perspective on life. There can be a lot of criticism that can be flung our way, or cruelty that can be flung our way. I was yelled at from a car the other day. That just came to me. That hasn't happened to me in years. But I was hollered at. I was walking down the street with my friend and we were cuddling and, doing cute best friend stuff. And they yelled out, "You fucking gay cunt." Oh, maybe I should probably bleep that out. Maybe you didn't hear me. They yelled that out at me. And I was like shocked because it hadn't happened in so long. And in a flash, in a very split second, I'm talking like a 10th of a second, it all rushed through me every single time it ever happened before. And it used to happen a lot when I was a teenager. But everything that was said to me, that was told me that I was gross or weak or worthless or, revolting, all of those different connotations that, dim-witted homophobes have. And I think, a lot of it's just related to their own fear of their own vulnerability. That's where their hate comes from. I really believe that now. But isn't that funny? Like when sort of met with that, in an instant, it all, like a Rolodex, went all over in my mind. And I was, but I, was fine. It was just some dead shit yelling from a car. But it's interesting to see what we file away. And this is what the 10 of Swords talks about. It does talk about what we file away. And because it's the 10, it's the end of that cycle. So it is an opportunity to set it free too. Because the sun's coming up behind this this rather grim scene. The sun always rises. And that's a lovely thing to remember about the 10 of Swords too. So, in the third house, that's an interesting story for me to tell you. I hope that everything's all right in your village, and I hope that you're feeling welcome and secure in the place that you are, Aries. I hope that you're not feeling like an outsider, because that's an annoying feeling. It can be a really sad feeling too. It can also be a great feeling if that's your vibe, if that's your thing, you know, if you don't mind so much to walk down the street and have everyone go, oh yeah, well, whispery, whispery, sort of Witches of Eastwick kind of feeling. We can laugh at it sometimes too. And actually, if we can laugh at it, it makes it really small. I think sometimes that's a really magical thing to do, is to effing laugh at small-mindedness. Okay, so that's the card we're working with for the moon. This is what the moon is highlighting for us. So maybe there's something in that story about my experience with the yelling, uncomfortableness in neighborhood, uncomfortableness enough to be yourself. The Pisces part of it, the illusion, the magical delusion, is the Ten of Cups. And so this card almost could be written for Neptune in Pisces. The way that I look at this is I see the rainbow, and I see the couple, and I see the children, and I see their property in the background with the red roof, and sometimes I see a dog in it, although there's no drawing of a dog in this one. I think I made that up. And what I see is an illusion. I see a fairy story, and I see I see a movie, and they're all graciously looking up at the rainbow and thinking to themselves, oh, and isn't that funny that there's a rainbow in this card, but in this drawing anyway, it's very, very, very hetero. What's going on down the bottom? Although I will say that the woman that drew these cards, her name's Pamela Coleman Smith, and she was a black lesbian in the 1800s, and she drew these cards. So if ever you're feeling out of step with your queer identity when approaching spiritual stuff like this, always remember that Pamela drew these images. She's on our team. That's somewhere else. Delusion though, isn't it? There's something here about like fantasy, and maybe the way that this reading's going, it might be other people's fantasy that's being projected onto you, or other people's illusion of normality, or a sense of like calm, simple, kind. Yeah, I think normality. You are who you are, Aries, and you'll prance around being your beautiful self effortlessly at home. That's the wrong thing to say, because it does come with a lot of effort to be so continually yourself, and we admire you for that, Aries. We admire and encourage your sense of self. You know, that's really valuable. What I see, and this is a different reading to everybody else, there's a projected feeling of normality that you're willing and wanting to resist at this time, and it might have something to do with your neighborhood. It might have something to do with your I won't say friends, but I'll say like colleagues, or folks that you know because of a certain thing. You work with them, or you're in the same, out of happenstance rather than seeing eye to eye and connecting on an intellectual, emotional, spiritual way. It's because of, oh yes, we both shop at the same thing, or locals. There's a projection here of a sense of normality, and perhaps your simple existence, or the way that you live your life, the way that you operate your family, or your relationships, or your day-to-day rituals of the goddess, they might be very, very different, and they might be experiencing, different to others, different to this imposed feeling of normality, is what I'm saying. And there might be kind of voices that are sort of rising in contention of your happy, blissful, engaged, free-flowing freedom. Here's the thing, Aries. Some people feel so trapped by their circumstance. They feel so trapped by their sense of normality that when they witness other folks that don't subscribe to that, they think to themselves, they're free. There's no shackles there. Why am I shackled? And then their resentment rises, and that's sometimes why they lash out too. I can only put that down to just this experience real recently with this dead shit yelling at me from a moving car. I'm sensitive, my eye was raised. I was like, whoa, what? Not blah, blah, blah. But then instantly I came back to this feeling of, oh, you poor bugger. Because all you want to do is hold hands with your best mate, or cuddle, or be sweet, or maybe take it a little further. That's none of my business, but there's something that you're not getting that you think that I've got, and therefore you're going to lash out. That's a real shame. So this is a very different reading to everybody else's Aries, but I think that it really kind of sits with you. I'm probably not going to bother talking about Saturn. Yeah, it's not important at this time. Yeah, this is important. This, depending on how you look at it, is the biggest fantasy, the biggest illusion of them all. Monogamous couple, 2.5 kids, an imaginary dog, and a rainbow. Now, come on. In reality, we know that folks like this might not really be waving a rainbow flag. You're free to live your life the way that you want to, Aries. You're free to investigate and in focus on anything that brings you peace and comfort and happiness. The lighter side of this card is that it could represent happiness as well. And that's what I want for you, darling Aries. So pop your little blanket on. Send them a good wish. Send them a good wish. As Miss Coco Peru says, I don't know, it's one of the things I do to chill out when I'm off to Betty Buys, is I just watch beautiful Miss Coco Peru just go for a window shop in Walgreens or Big Lots or Costco, wherever. Although she was kicked out of Costco, so don't go to Costco. And she, what part of her mission for doing that, part of her reason for doing that, is because she says, I'm just like everybody else and I've got a right to exist in this life, no matter how I want to dress. It's the most beautiful, simple, engaging way to be kind of like an Aries. I'm not sure of Miss Coco's astrology, but it's your existence is an act of resistance against the fantasy of other people's unhappiness or other people's happiness. Sorry, I wanted that last sentence to be really like, doesn't matter. You know what I mean. Be you, be yourself. It's hard to, if it's continual sort of threats of violence, if it's continual drudgery and like you feel, if you feel really singled out, that's a harder kind of lightness to achieve, isn't it? But maybe just through this message of me telling you that you're absolutely beautiful and that you will do as you will, you can feel a bit more protected. If some dead shit yells at you from a car or whatever circumstance that you're experiencing. Yeah, different reading for you, Aries, but it's not you, it's them. I love you. You can throw me the drama masks down in the comments if you like. I think, the last emojis worked really beautifully. The snakes really helped the work get out. So if you're still here with me, send me your favorite emoji that represents duality in honor of Gemini season. You can throw some tip money in the jar at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby. I can read your birth chart or your tarot or both at umaruby.com. And I'll be with you in 2 weeks for the full moon in Capricorn. So until then, Aries, take it easy. I love you. F them. Water off a duck's back, as beautiful Jinx Monsoon would say. I'll speak to you then in 2 weeks. Love you. Have a good new moon. Relax. Bye. Hello, Leo Rising. Welcome to your horoscope for the new moon in Gemini, happening on Sunday the 18th of June at 20 wait, at 2:39 p.m. if you're in the Southern Hemisphere with me. Now, yeah, these readings are sort of feeling a little bit cozier than usual, although they're normally quite cozy, I hope. But I think the ultimate message for this one is to kind of like relax. Hard to right now. I know this to be true. Feels a bit tense out there, doesn't it? Maybe it feels a bit tense in there too. But we've got a major influence from one of the outer planets on this new moon, Leo. So let's first of all have a look at Gemini and see where that is in your chart and what part of life we focus on. For you, it's your 11th house, so it's your sense of humanity and the greater group. It's your kind of maybe friendship circles and the folks that you roll with, who you feel a part of. And maybe if you kind of zoom out enough, it could be your sort of sense of kinship and love for the human species, if that is something that exists for you. I hope it does. I'm hanging on to the faith that it does. So at a new moon in this house, it would be, a great, lovely evening for you to kind of, look at maybe different ways that you can be active. You can sort of like be a bit more, involved socially or involved in community groups, involved in some way of helping. There's a interception here at this new moon, though. There's a kind of like, it's sort of like wires crossed, but definitely a sort of like someone's thrown a smoke bomb in the way of kind of maybe a clearer line of intention. So we're going to have a look at Pisces as well in this reading, Leo, because in the sign Pisces, the planet Neptune is at 27 degrees. Now, they've been in Neptune for the last decade at least. In our lifetime, the first time that Neptune entered Pisces was in 2011. And so they were there for a few months, then they got out, and then they re-entered again in 2012. And they've been in Pisces for all of this time, and they won't leave until January of 2026. So there's been an extra emphasis of, or extra sprinkling of fairy dust, or there's been sort of, the foggy incense of the shaman's den has been in Pisces for a long time. You could probably globally put that down to folks and their gaining in confidence and as far as their language around spirituality or alternative religions or magical divination practices, the occult, the esoteric, all of those sorts of things. You could look to the influence of Neptune in Pisces. There's also something kind of like the facade about Neptune as well. We think about the planet that brings with it. It's kind of like the magician in the tarot. If you know the tarot very well, that's kind of quite a heavy Neptunian sort of vibe. There's something about sort of the wool being pulled over one's eyes as well. Now for you, Leo, Pisces rules a really interesting part of your chart, which is your 8th house. And we've spoken about this quite a lot in the last horoscopes. Whenever we talk about Pisces, if there's a new or full moon there, we'll hone in on the 8th house, which is quite a vulnerable place, quite an ecstatic place too, I would say. I always think of the French term for an orgasm, the little death, when I think of the 8th house, because it sort of encapsulates both of those things. The French have a great turn of phrase, don't they? But the idea of relating a sense of the orgasmic sensation as being a little death, le petit mort, I think it's called. So it's like, when we come, do we taste death? It's very French, very French. But I kind of think about that the definition or that language when I think about the 8th house sometimes, because we do learn to grieve in the 8th house. We do set things free. We do feel the intensity of connection in the 8th. And we do have to learn to say goodbye. So if you think about that part of your life, that area for you, and think about the last decade, and think about what you've been able to call on to get you through difficult moments, and think about what you where there might be a bit of like bypassing that might be happening when things do get cut to the quick as well, when things get really sort of intense, and when life's big lessons show up for you, or when they have shown up for you over the last decade or so. Where were you sticking your head in the sand, or kind of clinking your chimes together, waving your peace flags to not feel it? And where were you calling on the power of something else to protect and guide you? Where were you finding the channels where you could have those conversations that you couldn't have? Because that I would believe in, that I would really encourage you to find comfort through that. And you'll know what's different too. You'll know the times in life when you've sort of been like, oh, I was really not willing to feel that grief, and so I invested elsewhere. I deluded myself somewhere else, or I buried my head in the sand, or I didn't look at it because it was too difficult. There's a difference between that, and there's a difference between I called upon the natural elements of the galaxy to provide me with a safe, soft, gentle bed to grieve and to cry my tears, and to have one last audience with those that I miss so sincerely. Big difference, isn't there? Yeah. And the difference is we can feel one of them, and we can hear one of them. We're telling ourselves the other. So, the relationship between your 8th house and your 11th house, I can see the connection, because, things haven't changed since last fortnight, have they, Leo? Like, things haven't changed since the fortnight before, or the month before, or the year before. Things are working towards a certain intensity right now. And we are drifting in a space of polarized voices. We're longing to turn the heat down, so the aggression and the agitation and the fight can like ease a bit. So we're sensing. The reason I'm talking about this again, I apologize, Leo, but it's your 11th house. So we do zoom out. We do think about everyone else in the 11th house. It's kind of, that's like we're sort of taking in the greater whole, rather than sort of working from our point of light in the 11th house. It's lovely for a Leo rising because Gemini is definitely conversational, so there's definitely a willingness to sort of talk it out in the 11th house. There's a beautiful town square that I can see in your 11th house, Leo. But it can be not a very fun place to be if there's always this sort of going on. I say this, but I also recognize that progress doesn't happen without a fight. When there's continual kind of language that is sort of centered around the idea of like, oh, no one can discuss anything these days. Oh, it's just, I feel really attacked. I feel hung out to dry because I'm just casually expunging and expelling all of these really hateful terminologies and this hateful rhetoric. But I'm doing it in a conversational way. No one can, I'm just questioning your right to exist, that's all. That can be really frustrating, and that can really get your ire up, and that can be sort of like, I know life and death. I'm sort of feeling that Neptune in Pisces sort of like, you're wanting to spell cast it away. And that no amount of helpful, peaceful conversation is going to make a clearing for the rigid clutches of the oppressive system, relax a bit and go, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Oh, well, therefore, yes, of course, I do see that you have a right to exist as a human being. So history teaches us that there is always like intensity, and that's why it's called a movement. We're living through a beautiful, intense period of revolution. I like to think that. I think that is happening. I think that the generations that are under me, I admire them. I don't want to put so much responsibility on them too, that it's their responsibility to fix stuff. That's always sort of, there's certain, that's a pattern too, where the older generations sort of throw up their hands and say, oh, the kids will sort it out. God love them. They've got pluck. That's not fair. I think that, it's like we've got to work with them on this. But in terms of equality, which is being, the difference between equity and equality is really important to bring into the room as well as we're discussing this 11th house. Because the other square that's happening between Pisces and Gemini is between Saturn and Mercury. So Mercury brings, the crystal clear information. Mercury is brilliant in Gemini. When Mercury's in Gemini, we get to, our words have meaning. There's a clarity that happens in our conversation. But Mercury is squaring Saturn in Pisces. And so Saturn is about limitation, about restriction, authority. So this friction between your 8th house, another way to read the 8th house is kind of obligation. Perhaps the way that whatever contract you've signed that obligates your commitment or energy to somebody else. That's another way to read the 8th house. It's not an especially fun place. Although with Pisces in the 8th, Leo, I think that you probably have the stuff to make it so. What I kind of feel here is, I feel definitely I want to take it down and not have you feel kind of frothing into a point of such responsibility that it overwhelms you and perhaps brings you back to a place of grief. I don't know, Leo, but there might be something that you kind of feel that you're the only one to do it. Is there a lot of weight on your shoulders at the moment where you're sort of maybe consistently sort of like, doing something for the good of the community? What would the community think? That beautiful Nirvana album's in my head again, that title, what would the community think? The rebel yell. The rebel yell is strong with you, Leo. I wonder, maybe that's what it is too. Maybe Neptune in your 8th house, maybe a bit of magic, like a bit of magic from our past. Okay, here we go. Here's the reading. Leo, you've got a real great sense for lineage. You look to your elders and you look to the folks that have come before us, that have inspired you. You look to them with such reverence. You really hold them up. You really have a brilliant sense of come on, Uma. You hold your past in reverence. The archetypes that you have chosen to follow and to focus on and to learn from, you hold them up with such great pride. So when you're thinking about contemporary community, when you're thinking about the state of things, the state that we're in, that the human species is in right now, Leo, look to the magic of the past. And it's a different world because obviously if we're talking counterculturally, if we're talking from the fringes and stuff like that, that was kind of a different level of bravery, but also a different cloak of invisibility that was maybe could be used as protection. Everything feels quite out in the open now, doesn't it, Leo? So we're all kind of interacting in the virtual town square, which is the internet, and there is this sort of growing sense of like individuation, sort of like coming from my perspective, my experience, all of that language too, which you're here to guide us about, and you're here to remind everyone that that comes from love. Get to the bottom of it, Uma. The point of this reading, and what I'd love for you to harness in on, Leo, is the elders from the past, however that hits home for you. If you're a rock and roller, I want you to have a little think about Tina. I mean, talk of Leo, we lost her real recently, and she was a Leo rising like you. So if you're like, look to your elders, look to the lessons that they learned, look to what they published, look to what they were putting out there and putting forward, and how they dealt with oppression, how they dealt with conservatism, and what languages did they find to break through to the other side. Feels kind of critical, and I know I said that you shouldn't do anything, and I would probably double down on that too, because if we're going to look at this Saturn in square with Mercury, Saturn is the outer limits to generations gone by. The ancients could only see as far as Saturn, so that was the boundary. We're pushing boundaries. This generation, this era is pushing boundaries. We're expanding, hopefully in order for those boundaries to then dissolve and dissipate so we can all connect, right? Your alternative lifestyle, your alternative way of thinking, you're living outside of some sort of convention is really valuable, and you're standing on the shoulders of giants, Leo. So at this new moon in Gemini, when you're ready to start waving that flag, hoist it up, think of Tina. It doesn't have to be Tina, but think of those that came before you and how they did it, how they continued to fight and speak up for their rights. Read their speeches, read their biographies maybe at this new moon. And hopefully by doing that, you'll feel maybe less alone in times when it's a bit lonely. That's the reading. There you go. Hope that made sense. I didn't really show you any tarot, but I can't be bothered. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm just trying to be a bit more conversational with this stuff and not so authoritarian with my analysis. Big love to you, Leo. If you'd like to tip me, you can put some money in my tip jar at buymeacoffee.com/UmaRuby. If you're still here with me, please put the drama masks in the comments. Those snakes last time really helped with getting my work circulated, so I really thank you very much for that. If you feel like sending me an emoji, that would be great. The drama mask would be awesome, but also pick, whatever you want. I can read your birth chart and your tarot at umaruby.com, and I'll be with you in 2 weeks for the full moon in Capricorn. So until then, Leo, take it easy. Think of Tina. Big wheels keep on turning. Proud Mary keep on burning, babe. I'll speak to you soon. Bye. Hello, Sagittarius. This is your horoscope for the new moon in Gemini happening on the 18th of June at 2:39 p.m. if you're in the southern hemisphere with me. So if you're in the northern, it's the night before on the 17th. And there's kind of nothing really that we can do or should do or feel pressured to do at this one, Sagittarius rising, because all of the mutable signs, which is Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, and Virgo, are probably all feeling a bit conflicted right now and feeling a bit split down the middle, which normally works for us, normally works for the mutable signs, because we know that there isn't a finite sort of resolve in us that knows the right answer. The reason that all of these signs are called the mutable signs is because they give way to the weather of the next season. So up in the north, there's a different kind of connotation to Gemini season. There's something that kind of feels a bit more vibrant and hopeful because spring is on the way. Whereas here in the southern hemisphere, we're stepping into winter, and there's a hibernation that happens in Gemini season for all of us down here. The sun goes away at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock. And if you're privileged enough to have your body clock sort of in rhythm, your circadian rhythm in line with the luminaries, you might be feeling a bit sort of sleepy and tired around that time and ready to nestle in. And that's just the feeling physically, our sort of body's reacting and responding to the weather. Astrologically, spiritually, there's a real kind of stern conversation that's happening at this new moon. It's between the sign Gemini and the sign Pisces. And so for you, Sagittarius rising, Gemini does rule your 7th house of dearest relationships, of beloveds. And so at a new moon in Gemini, that's the evening for you to, to be a fantasist and to wonder and to wish and to dream about what the next round of coupling will look like for you, or the next phase of your relationship, or the next lover that will grace your satin pillow slips. The square that's happening, which is always pressure. Remember, when there's planets in conversation 90 degrees apart, there's a fight for some sort of authority happening. And so Pisces, Sagittarius rising, rules your 4th house, which is your home, your root system, your privacy, and sometimes your ancestry too. So in Pisces, there's the planet Neptune, which has been lingering and swimming around there for over a decade now. The first entry of Neptune into Pisces was 2011, and then it slipped back into Aquarius, but then back into Pisces from 2012, early on in February, and has stayed there for over a decade. So if we think about this kind of influence of magic and of sort of mysticism, and also a good way to think about Neptune's influence might be fantasy, facade, non-reality. So this square that's happening is because Neptune is lingering at 27 degrees of Pisces. They're sort of on their way out. They won't have left Pisces until January of 2026 full time, but they're kind of in aspect. They do speak, they do talk. And so what I feel is a push and a pull between your lovers, between your relationship house and your ancestry or your home. Are you sharing space? Do those two areas of life, do they have a cohesive relationship? Funny thing to look at a birth chart though, because those two houses are always going to be in square. The 7th house of relationship, nearest and dearest, if you have planets in there, they will always be in square with planets in your 4th house. I find that really funny because if we think about 4th house in terms of ancestry, then it's almost as if there's sort of like this kind of not good enough for, I don't know, for whatever reason, I've got a domineering but loving caregiver in my mind's eye who's sort of like, no, they're not good enough for you, darling. That's just one thing. It might not be that, but like that's kind of at this particular lunation, that's the energy we're sort of working with, is this sort of like opinions. I'm going to show you the tarot cards too, because they're sort of aiding me in talking about this. But yeah, as we know, every sign has 3 decans, 3 sections that have a tarot card devoted to each of them. So the final decan of the final decan of Gemini in your 7th house is the 10 of Swords. And so this is the culmination, the ending of a very difficult mental pattern or thought cycle. You can see that there's a lot of barbed truth in this image, perhaps weaponized truth as well, perhaps arguments, fights, those sorts of things, or even maybe that could even be internalized. If it's Gemini in your 7th house Sagittarius, I imagine that sometimes you second guess yourself in romantic relationships. You think to yourself, I'm going to get out of this one because they're no good for me, or I'm shit and I'm actually no good in relationships. That's just one example of having Gemini in the 7th house. That might not be the way that you feel. But when I look at this card, I often do think about the sun coming up in the background. So it's like the end. It's like this is finished. Whatever test this was, this test of the mind, it's over and done with now, Sagittarius. So you can sort of look forward to that clearing. And it would be really great with the new moon here to work with this clearing and be like, okay, that was really difficult, but now I can ask, I can receive what's coming next. The last decan of Pisces is the 10 of Cups. So you can see there a rainbow, and the cups represent our emotions, and there's a couple there and some children, and I think a dog. Is there a dog? No, I invent the dog. I see a dog in this card often. Maybe not in this version, but I'll draw a dog in there in my version. There's probably 2.5 kids I'll probably draw as well. There's 2 kids in this, but I'll draw a little half a kid as well, because I see this 10 of Cups card as a bit of delusion. And it's kind of working in a great relationship with Neptune in Pisces. That is also a potential for delusion. So in your 4th house, perhaps in your mind's eye of what you are hoping for, what you are looking for, what you thought that the 4th and the 7th would ultimately look like at this juncture in your life, at this age, at this bracket of time. And if it's not looking like the fantasy of that, and perhaps if Neptune is in there sort of being a bit sort of like a cheeky fairy and sort of saying, well, you know, this relationship that you're in now is sort of fine, but it's not this, this is what we were sort of working towards. That could be sort of how you maybe be feeling right now. Or you could be also being a bit cruel and a bit sort of critical that maybe, yeah, if your 4th house and your 7th house aren't as robust as you thought they would be at this point in your life, there could be the evil side of Gemini, the nasty side, the gossipy side in your ear saying, you're useless. Look what you've got, not very much. Not at this age. There could be like internalized sort of criticism. So in the plus side of this sort of configuration, a square with Neptune, there might be a wave of, you know, cosmic connection. You might be in your relationships, if you're spending the night with someone on this new moon, you might feel some pretty out there messages emanating off them from their physicality. The answers might be available to you at this new moon too. That's why I sort of said at the beginning, and it's probably because I'm in winter time too, so it's like I don't want to do anything anyway. But like the advice is really strongly to not kind of try and start anything. You know, sometimes at a new moon, some people they do their magical work and they prepare themselves for the next round of that house, the next round of hopes and dreams and wishes. But I think, yeah, if Neptune's going to be any sort of positive influence, we'll step away from the delusion of a fourth, seventh house harmony. And look, I'm second guessing myself. I don't wish to sort of. I find commitment and loving relationships and two folks or three folks, four, however many partners you have in a romantic situation. But I find that commitment and that sort of common ground objective to build together doesn't have to be family too. It can be anything, but it's a sort of like a commitment to stick by one another. I find that really remarkable. I find it really admirable, and I witness it, and I think that it's really cool. I've had limited experience with trusting myself enough to have that stick. And so when it does come to the 10 of Cups, this is Uma personally, but I do get a bit critical of that. My gaze outward is never critical. I would never look at a young family or a young, a young family can mean all sorts of different things too, can't it? I would never look at a commitment, a group of folks that are committed to one another with a critical gaze. It's often with an admiring gaze. The trick is for us all as individuals to separate the fantasy from the reality, or to separate the fairy tale from the alternative possibilities. I'm no expert in anything, Sagittarius. I would like to think that I don't have to be, and I would like to think that there's enough space on this planet for folks that are still figuring it out, and folks that are unpicking some of that fantasy about happy couple, happy family, wealth, growth, all of that sort of thing. Could be going either way. The other aspect that's quite harsh between Gemini and Pisces is Saturn and Mercury. So Mercury is great in Gemini. They're really great at relaying information. They're really great at sort of getting to the bottom of things, chatting it out, talking it out. So this is seventh house stuff here. This is relationships. The square with Saturn in Pisces is much stricter than Neptune. Neptune might have a propensity to delude you, whereas Saturn, no. Saturn will be like, this is the reality. I'm pulling rank here, and this is what I'm telling you is the truth. So that's kind of that. You can see there's that double-edged pressure at this new moon. Another reason that the invitation is to just do nothing, just like nestle in, keep your ears open, keep your dream journal by your bed. But I think, I'm happy for this. This horoscope seems to sort of, I think the mutable ones for me are kind of coming out a bit easier. I'm mutable up the wild. I've got so much in the mutable signs in my chart. So I guess that's why I can sort of maybe identify with this sort of like, maybe yes, maybe no, I'm not so sure. Oh, I thought that I could. Or the mutable signs can sometimes feel like they're not living up to their potential, or they're not living up to the idealized version of their caregivers, or that's not my experience. I sometimes talk about myself too much. I can identify with this feeling of, not living up to one's potential, or not having sincere enough skin in the game out of fear. Gemini is kind of like the sign that's sort of like, maybe. Pisces is like, what? And Sagittarius is like, let's do it. Oh, wait, bumblebees, let's go here. The only one out of them probably is Virgo, that mutable earth sign, but they're still sort of like their sort of impressionability manifests as insecurity sometimes. Your Virgo friends can sort of be like, they sort of hang on to perfecting because they're sort of, they've got limited faith in themselves. And so what you teach them, they'll believe forever. Yeah. So we've all got that in common. And so so the mutable signs are impressionable to like other people's disappointment too. I'm not sure why I'm sort of leaning so heavily on the feelings of other people, but that's kind of where the reading is going, Sagittarius. So, yeah, don't do anything at this one. Have a little think about your fourth house, your home, your roots, your privacy, maybe your ancestry, maybe those that loved you and took care of you, and those before. It's deep, the fourth house. It's very private too. The seventh house is also quite intense in a lovely way, but also really difficult, because how do you learn how to co-create? How do you learn to relate and come into partnership with other folks? By trial and error. So if you're at the error bit of it, this new moon, don't sweat it, because everyone else is barking up the bullshit of this card, so who cares? Whatever. Being facetious, sorry to close it that way, but I love you, Sagittarius. If you're still here with me, throw the drama masks in the comments. The snakes worked a treat last time, so I really thank you very much for that. You don't have to comment or say anything, just a little emoji will help the algorithm. They'll think I'm cool. So you can do that. You can tip me at buymeacoffee.com/umaruby if you like. And also, I can read your birth chart or your tarot cards, and we can organize that at umaruby.com. I have been doing a few house calls, which has been delightful. So if we're in the same state, yeah. Head to the website, send me an email. Love you very much, and I'll be with you in 2 weeks for the full moon in Capricorn. Until then, Sagittarius, fly free. I love you. Bye.